The Grand Slam is still very much alive, and we check in with a man that knows all about Grand Slams, one of the winners in 1984, Roger Gould, to join on the Raw Rugby podcast. In addition, Petris du Plessis, the former Wallabies scrum coach who knows this side better than most, particularly Taniela Tupou and Angus Bell. Will Taniela feature against Scotland this weekend at Murrayfield? Before that, and before we get to them, Dan Parks, the Scottish great, joins me, Christy, Doran, and you're listening to the Raw Rugby podcast. As always in this autumn national series, it's a very warm welcome to Dan Parks. Dan, bloody good to see you.
Always good to see you, Christy. Yeah, wasn't it an amazing overnight experience watching the Wallabies put 50 on Wales? I don't know if too many people expected that, but I'm sure we'll uncover it just a sec. But it was awesome to watch, and that's 2 weeks in a row now. It's been well and truly getting up nice and early to watch games of footy.
I'll tell you what, 52-20, when you've lost a man to 20 minutes for an upgraded red card, there weren't too many people that would have been thinking that that's the end scoreline when Karevi was shown and sent on his merry way. Look, so much to unpick, and we're going to do it by getting into the Wallabies first, but we will come to the All Blacks later on because what a match they had at the start to France, a 30-29 defeat. It snaps their unbeaten streak where they were 5 in a row. They were looking like they were once again world beaters, but Anton Dupont's French, too good in the end. Parksy, did you get up and watch that one for some Sunday morning breakfast viewing?
I did, yeah. I watched most of the games over the weekend. I think 2 of them were at perfect times, as in the it all started with Ireland and Argentina on our Saturday morning, and then Sunday morning was the New Zealand-France game, which that was a classic. I think, anyone that saw the haka as well, that was really, really special, how the French Federation of Rugby did that, sort of highlighting both the teams. It was complete darkness around the ground. There was only people's mobile phones on. It was such a cool look and fully respectful of the All Blacks doing the haka with the French crowd. That was really cool, and I thought it set a real great tone for one of the great games. Like, you didn't know who was going to win. It was just a classic.
It totally was. What was a better test? I'll put you on the spot. The Wallabies England a week earlier, or that French New Zealand game? Because both crackers, they go down to the final play, the last whistle, and there's only ever one winner.
Yeah, well, I think, obviously as a Wallaby fan, I have to say that the Wallabies game, I think that'll be something that'll certainly live in people's minds for a long time. But again, that game, that Sunday morning game, any one of those teams could have won it. You mentioned that guy's name, Antoine Dupont. He is special. I was really impressed with the French wingers. I thought they had great games, and that's probably almost a flavour of the weekend. I thought the Australian wingers as well overnight, like Andrew Kellaway's game. I know everyone's talking about Tom Wright, but geez, Kellaway, he was pretty awesome this morning.
You're not wrong. They were both very, very special indeed. Yeah, lots of rugby over the weekend. It's such a great time of year. Ireland, too good for Argentina, but that was a belter, and it kick-started a great festival of weekend. Before we kind of unpick a bit of that later on, were you surprised by the result, by the way that Argentina managed to not just hang in there, but be in the hunt the whole time?
Yeah, not surprised at all. Argentina, when I was playing, they were always very, very difficult team to play against. The game was never over. And I think, Ireland got themselves in such a strong position, and they probably not felt a sense of being comfortable. You can never do that in Test match rugby, but, it was a really interesting game. For those who saw it, Argentina scored the first try in the first 2 minutes. And what we have come to expect now, it got all the way back. There was a referee call or a TMO call. They went back and they adjudicated on a head clash. And the Argentinian inside centre, who eventually scored the try, he got sent to the bin. And then Ireland got on a bit of a roll. They scored 2 early tries. They got another one. So Ireland were in control at the break. But as Argentina do, they just don't give up, and they just kept coming and coming and coming. And I think for Ireland, it was a desperate win for them. They needed it. Argentina were coming hard right at the end. So Argentina, they'll be disappointed, and I think Ireland, there'll be a sense of relief in particular with what happened last week. I heard something recently about the amount of wins Ireland have had over the last 3 years. So for them to almost experience another loss in, 2 losses in a row in Ireland would have been almost unheard of.
Yeah, would have left a Dublin crowd at the Aviva shell-shocked. The other results, the Springboks too good for England. Let's, though, start with Cardiff and start with the Wallabies, because so much occurred. 8 tries in the end, an emphatic victory for Joe Schmidt's side. They go back-to-back. It's the first time outside of a World Cup year that they've won overseas in consecutive games, I think, since 2017, which is just extraordinary. It shows the inconsistency of this Wallaby side and how it's been so hard for fans to be able to celebrate and support them. But if there was something that you thought, okay, that's the reason why they've won this, was there one reason or was it multiple? Because last week it was a complete performance by pretty much 1-23. Once again, players stood up again. Probably the only person that struggled a little bit by his own lofty standards was Angus Bell at the scrum, but another really good, promising performance. And it was a totally different game to the one at Twickenham a week earlier.
Yeah, I think there was a combination of, of reasons why they were so successful. One of them being the speed of their ruck. And I know it's an area where Joe Schmidt will have been working on all the coaching stuff. There was someone who mentioned about Laurie Fisher, about how particular he is around his quality of presentation come ruck time. And I think we saw that in particular this morning. And it was really interesting as well. One thing I also picked up on was the way Australia were playing. They weren't playing, for example, same way rugby. They would do a midfield hit, then they'd go back to the short side nice and quick. It was almost a game of whoever can realign quicker, the attack or the defence. And from what I saw, the Australian option taking around their short passing game with their forwards in particular, some of their backs combining so well, it just looked neat is probably the best way I'd describe that. I thought you mentioned before about the scrum. That was probably the only area where at times we possibly struggled. I think the line out, clearly there was 3 tries, I think, from the rolling maul. Fezler took one on himself, and that was an amazing score he did. But yeah, I think it was just one of those kind of games. As a Wallaby fan, you sort of never really felt like the game was in doubt because they were just so dominant, what appeared to be in so many different facets, and their ability to move the ball, run from wherever they want. The skill level they've got out wide at the moment is incredible. We mentioned Andrew Kellaway. Tom Wright probably had his best game in a Wallaby jersey. I thought, again, the centres, Karevi, while he was on the field, Iki Tau once again was instrumental. And, that number 10, he's growing and growing every single week. He kicked the majority of his goals. I think he kicked 6 from 8. But he didn't have too many easy ones. And again, we talk about these type of guys each week up front, but Fraser McWright, Rob Valentini, they were just heroic. As the game went on, I noticed the impact Valentini had in particular with his power. And that's going to be, it's going to be a really interesting matchup if we look forward to this week against Scotland. Previous week when South Africa played against Scotland, where Scotland fell away was as the game went on, South Africa's power just became so apparent. And I think this week, going into playing against Scotland, it's going to be the power game. If we can really get on top of them in that physical battle, then the Wallabies will certainly have the ability to get on top of the Scots. But that's going to be an intriguing matchup in itself.
We're going to speak more and more about the Wallabies and what went right against Wales and what they need to do more to continue in their winning ways in the minutes to come. But before then, we're going to introduce someone who knows all about Grand Slams and all about Grand Slam winning. A famous Wallaby, one of the greats of Australian rugby, Roger Gould. Hey, Roger, welcome to the Raw Rugby Podcast. Thanks for joining. How are you?
Well, thanks, Christy. How are you?
Excellent, and all the better for being able to bask in the glory and be able to celebrate the Wallabies for once, because it seems like it's been a long, long time since we've been able to talk about the Wallabies in a positive way. How do you feel? Like you're part of the side that put the Wallabies on the map, and not just in Australia, but worldwide. It must be a pretty special feeling to be able to see the Wallabies at the moment have some success.
I think you're right, but I think just winning, regardless of whether people are looking at it as a Grand Slam type tour, because they happen so infrequently now. So it's, we had a lot of chances prior to sort of us, and there weren't too many after us. It pretty well stopped after us. So these guys got a great opportunity. I think we've only actually been back for 2 other opportunities of Grand Slams, as opposed to sort of every 4 years it was. But in terms of anything else, I'm just pleased to see that they're winning, and I'm a little befuddled, but I'm happily befuddled because the change since they got to Europe is extraordinary. They changed tactics, they changed strategy. Their skill level was vastly improved. And yeah, I over the previous sort of 6-7 tests, which were played completely and utterly differently, and I don't know whether Joe was foxing the whole time before he got there, but it was a degree of change in those areas which would warrant probably swabbing the lot of them.
Yeah, I think I'll jump in there. I think, Roger, from what I'm seeing as well, you made mention there of they almost like a completely different side since they've got to Europe. I think there was certainly, for me, there were signs of under the Joe Schmidt regime that they were improving over the first couple of tests. But I think the fact that they had time together in Australia before they've gone over to Europe, there wasn't bruised and battered bodies potentially while they were playing in that series coming off the back of their Super Rugby. I wonder if that had a big impact or has had an impact on what you're seeing in Europe. Would you agree?
Not really, because there was a major strategy change. If you look at their preceding test matches, I don't know what the stats are. I just work off memory. But I'd like to see a stat on the number of box kicks during matches, which were being done prolifically in all the tests prior. And yet, if you think about the England game, I'm not sure if there wasn't 2 or 3 box kicks from either side in the first half combined. There was a middle 15 minutes where they seemed to kick the leather off the ball in box kicks when I think they were both trying to defend a lead, and then they stopped doing it again. So that's a pretty big change in strategy when you've been doing it for 6 or 7 tests on the trot. The fact that they changed things like their turnover ball, it would seem that they embraced a policy of as soon as it's turned over, move it a minimum of 1, if not 2 passes. I mean, if you think about that England game, there's a case where Harry Wilson just got the turnover and just blindly threw it to his left. Fraser did the same sort of thing. Their kick returns was again a case of move the ball very quickly and move it out into space, so where you got those guys who can run. But they were very big changes in strategy from what had been the norm up until they got there. The skill level, their catch and pass skill level, they've reduced their general kicking game right down. And I think that pays dividends because, in all honesty, they're very poor kickers of the football in general. But they're a much better running team. So I think whether that was part of Joe's process was to eliminate parts of the game and understand, because you can't teach old dogs new tricks. I don't care how long you coach somebody. You cannot teach. Not one of those kids can do a torpedo kick, for example, but they don't need to. So if you understand the limitations and you don't try and do the things that you think you should do because you see a big space or somebody says, I want you to do that. The things that you can do well, you should enhance. You cannot teach a 25-year-old how to do something that they haven't learned as a kid. It'd be like me challenging you to say, if you're a left-handed or right-handed rider, I know for a fact I can put $100,000 on the table now and give you 12 months unfettered practice, and you still won't be able to write left-handed as equally as well as you can with your right hand. That's a known scientific fact.
Hey, Roger, I reckon there will be a few rule punters that will take you out on that challenge about writing left-handed. Some people will say, I probably can't write right or left-handed, but it's an interesting couple of points that you talk about. And I know that Dan was interested in asking you about David Campese and some of his recent remarks, but I think it's appropriate to ask you now. he's never been one to shy away from saying what he thinks, and recently he's been in the media for questioning the skill sets, questioning the DNA of rugby, questioning whether or not New Zealanders can perhaps, they're not Australian. What do they know about Australian rugby? Look, Australian rugby once upon a time was known for being great runners of the ball. Do you think that we're seeing a little bit more of that, or is there any element of that? And what have you actually made of Campo's comments? Is there a strong element of truth in what he said?
Oh, I think David believes absolutely every word he says. But before people respond to what David says, he's a soft target because he talks without thinking. You've got to know the guy to understand who he is, how he thinks, and I get fairly disappointed in people throwing stuff at him without actually knowing the person. They're just looking at the commentary. Well, look, I can tell you now, I've had 1,000 journalists in my life say things about me which are totally and utterly and provable untrue. They've got the right to their opinion. That just makes them idiots because they don't want to go and validate the stories that they write. It just shows to me a lack of understanding. So, yeah, David makes his points. I don't agree with 100% of what David says, but I believe 100% that David believes what he says. And he doesn't have a filter as a person. I'm a personal friend. And he talks like that to us as a friend. I don't get upset by it because I know that that's just David. He's going to say something that sounds completely and utterly wrong. If you sit there and you want to spend the 20 minutes on a single point, you'll actually come to an understanding and go, right, okay. Like, he doesn't suffer subtlety. He doesn't understand that there's grey in the world, which is 90% of our lives. He's either black or he's white.
He did raise points, though, about a lack of the skill set and a lack of desire to run, to go away from kicking the leather off it. It's things that you're saying too. So do you think that, is everything old is new again? Like, is there a way to play rugby that doesn't involve just playing conservative?
I think it's a myth. The concept of, when people say, oh, what style of rugby do you want to play? And people say, oh, we want to play running rugby, or we want to play attractive rugby, or we want to play whatever sort of rugby. That's a crock, an absolute and utter crock. You should play rugby to win. If that means, and you have the ability, like the South Africans, everybody's gone after them because they got 20 forwards or something. They win, but it's a very unattractive game of football for a lot of it and how they actually manipulate it. But their desire is to win. And they do. They score a lot of tries, but they score them all mostly at the back end of the game when, as you sort of said before, Dan, for when the Wallabies go up to Scotland is to basically dominate them through the forward pack and take control of the physicality of the game. I think people should say, no, we're going to play whatever rugby is necessary to beat the opposition. But to say that, then you have to have a very, very, very good broad range of skills. So if you had to play a 10-man kicking game, you have the skills to play a 10-man kicking game and make it effective. Don't play a 10-man kicking game if you can't execute. If you need to run the ball wide, and I think these guys are understanding that they've got a good mobile pack, the likes of Fraser who gets around the place, Harry Wilson who turns up. Obviously, the tight five are all big and good at what they do. The front rowers predominantly can run the ball as well. So I think they're understanding where their strengths lie. I think they have probably analysed the fact that their strength is not to kick the ball too much because they're not particularly good at it, which is nothing bad. And they understand that they can get around the paddock very quickly, that they've developed some principles about moving the ball away to get to the space. The Fraser McWrights must know where that's going because he suddenly turns up very, very quickly, very, very wide on the paddock. You can only do that if you know where the ball's going. I think they're developing their style with the understanding of what they've got at their disposal in terms of their skill set.
Hey, Roger, what do you think of the Wallabies back three at the moment, and even Joseph Akusa-Suaalii? Like, Tom Wright's getting a fair few plaudits. What have you seen in his game that's taken him from a player that was pretty flaky, that had a lot of errors, decision-making was questionable, to someone this year who's having his breakout campaign as, I think, a 27-year-old now?
I think when his team's on the front foot, he is exceptional. It's very good on the front foot. He's had those hiccups during the season where it's, the whole team's a bit under the pump and he's having to sort of defend the back line of the whole lot. But he'll learn that. That's not an easy thing to do. But his front foot game is terrific. He gets caught out a little bit positionally against a good kicking side, so a good 9-10 kicking side. He gets a little bit caught out, but he's going to develop and get better and better. And I think, his back three guys that work with him, or the other two, they're all quality footballers. I mean, they've got speed, they're strong, they're aggressive in what they want to do. They're good off the ground, most of them, which, I think Joseph showed that in the England game, that he's got a lot of spring and bounce there. He still has to find his position. I mean, he had 9 good touches in that English test and a couple of errors. I mean, and I'm very happy for him to be named man of the match. But if I was picking a man of the match, an absolute street winner to that was that Len Ikitau. Jesus, he was good in that England game.
Yeah,
That's about as good a display as I've seen for a long, long time from anybody in the world in that position. But Joe comes in with a whole bunch of, interest on his back. So that's great. I mean, I think it's good that he's got the chance to have a go. I mean, he's a big hell of an athlete. I've got to say that much about him.
Yeah, he certainly is. He's a quality performer. And what he has done is created a lot of spark around the game. I think we all can recognise that. I'm not saying it was getting stale, but certainly Australian rugby needed something. Joe Schmidt has made
I agree 100%. You've hit it on the head.
Yeah.
It was no different to when Campo turned up, though. We were in the doldrums. We couldn't get on the back page of a newspaper. We didn't instantaneously have success when he arrived, but he did things that nobody had done before, ever, i.e. goose step. I mean, whoever thought of that thing for a start?
No, that's right.
But it hit headlines, and suddenly we went from page 6, inside 6 page, to the back page, just because one bloke did a dance step on a football field.
Bro,
I'll take that any time of the week.
Can I just go further on that? Can you give us some old tales of the Grand Slam tours from back in the day? Obviously, we're focusing a lot on now. What about back when you guys were winning those Grand Slam tours? What was it like? Give us an idea of what would happen after a game, after a big win.
Well, you probably don't want to know all that. That's
I do.
Well, look, it was a different era. I mean, we had guidelines.
Yep.
Okay. And you took the risk with, the guidelines were pretty well set and they were demonstrated. Jones said you could go out. There was no restriction saying, you can't have alcohol. We're not going to get tested the next morning or whatever like that. But at the same token, and he enforced this bloody religiously and hard, players got dropped, got put out of selection. If you turned up and could not perform at training, right? If you could not perform, not whether you'd been on the drink or whatever you'd had or slept, it didn't matter. If you did not perform at training, you were out. You were especially going to get severely punished if you knew that you had been on the drink and didn't perform at training. If you didn't perform at training and you'd done everything else right, he may have given you a bit of sway. So, again, and also we travelled with, a bit like, not quite like these guys, but we had 29 players, I think. So if you knew you were doubling up and playing the Wednesday game, which they don't do now either. So we had some guys would play 8, 9 games, Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday.
Wow.
Because you couldn't, people were getting injured, this happened, you needed certain people on the field. So it was a lot of matches, there was a hell of a lot of travel, but an enormously good amount of fun. We're just sharing, there's one player who wrote 2 foolscap pages in his diary, foolscap pages, every single day about everything we did from the point of waking up to when he saw the last person fall over. Now, that won't have been the last person either, but because you can't watch everybody. But it's an extraordinary things that he is writing about and publishing this to us every single day by day in comparison to the tour.
Yeah.
of 40 years ago. So this day, there'll be something come out tonight, and it'll be, this is what we did today 40 years ago.
Oh, that's amazing. Wow.
From
Awesome.
attending this function to going to Bunratty Castle to playing on the old course at St Andrews to visiting Buckingham Palace to people sliding down the staircase at Buckingham Palace to going to, I don't know, anything. We did so much. Then there was numerous, and he's got the name of pubs in there. Not that everybody went to that one pub, but that was where he went with his mate, so he wrote about that. But what it did was bring back stories from everybody else. So it was a hell of a time. It was extraordinary.
It's remarkable now, what you've got a 30-man touring squad with the Australian A team that just wrapped up their very swift tour, and you think about the doubling up there and playing from Saturday to Wednesday and the turnaround there. When you went over there and when you came back, did you quite recognise what your achievement and what you'd actually accomplished? And do you think that the team actually knew how good they were? You go through that side and from the Ellers to the Nick Farr-Jones to the Liners to the Slacks to the forwards there's some amazing players.
Well, I think I don't think anybody ever did. Internally within the team, none of us doubted ourselves in how competent we all were. And we just looked at the opposition. We'd played a lot of these teams before. We'd played them in different areas. We did a lot of travelling around the place outside of just the Wallaby tour, and Queensland tours are going to Europe. And, people like me and a couple of others would go and play 1,000 barbarian matches around the world against and with all these blokes. So we knew pretty well what they're all like. And when you stack people up and you go, I'm going to compare, Rodriguez against any other prop in that, the title, we go, well, okay, well, we got the best one. And Tommy Lawton, well, he's in the top two. So it was that Bob Dwyer theory, I think, that Dwyer brought out later in his career, saying that, every successful team needs to have 5 world-class players in it if you want to be the best, like a World Cup winning team or a Grand Slam winning team. And maybe this tour will develop a few of those. But, we had 5 world-class. So you say a team, if you picked a World 15 tomorrow, 2 months ago, we were probably lucky to get nobody in there. Now, Australia's probably got some guys knocking on the door to be picked into a world team tomorrow. But, you had the Liners, the Ellers, the Farr-Joneses. God, went all over the place. Campo himself. Rodriguez was in the best. Steve Williams would have been ranked up the top there. You had a back row. Tyneman probably was the best number 8 on the planet at the time. And then you had Poito and either Cody or Roach, if you're talking about the sort of the more consistent test players on that trip. Then we still had another 12, 13 guys sitting in the background. Michael Hawker, who 4 years earlier was a first-up centre. He couldn't make the run-on side of this team. So very good team. What do we know when we got back? Don't really know. I didn't come back for a while. So a bunch of us went off skiing. So Mark Ella, myself, Matty Burke, Tim Lane and Bill Carcraft went off to Switzerland, go skiing for a few weeks.
Oh, wow.
Didn't get back until sometime in January.
You didn't twist Mark Ella to decide to stay around, play on a bit longer than when he was 25?
I was rooming him in Scotland when he basically committed to leaving the game. And I tried very hard, very, very, very hard to convince him to stay. But, a lot of it was personal and no good for us. But anyhow, you had Michael Liner could step into that position and somebody else steps in. You're never going to keep everybody. And everybody gets a chance at some stage. So I don't lose much sleep over those sorts of things. Those guys they're good people. They have good conversations with other people, and they make their decision. Hell no, he may well have regretted it for a few years later or something, or even a day later. I don't know, but we all have that in our lives somewhere. Where we've gone, oh, bugger, I wish I hadn't done that.
Hey, Roger, before we go, can you believe, I know that you were saying beforehand that the turnaround from a couple of months ago to now is quite stark. The turnaround from 14 months ago when the Wallabies were pumped by Wales in Lyon with Eddie Jones as the coach. Can you believe that turnaround? You know Eddie a little bit, a short time that you spent with him, but can you like, has it caught you by surprise and you excited about the road to come with the Lions next year, knowing what you're seeing as well now?
Good question. I'm not surprised at the improvement from the Eddie period. I may have only been with him for 7 weeks, but I'd been with him for 3 years prior as a selector, and been watching there's a regrettable thing, thinking that I could have actually influenced some sort of change in that regime by going inside of it all. That didn't really work, did it? So no, not so much in that. We're never short of athletes in this country in terms of rugby athletes. So there is a lot of responsibility nowadays around the coaching programs. I spoke with Deans and Rennie, very, very, very briefly with Joe. Haven't really had a lot of time to talk to him, but the other guys. It's a difficult environment in Australia, and the environment's not created by the other codes and that. I think we still always have enough in numbers and athletes to find enough good players to be in the top 5 at least consistently, I believe. I think where we run into problem is we reluctantly, because the pressures of the game don't hold the line long enough. Change is not an easy thing. So when you have programs that weren't probably the best programs running around, to re-engineer those programs, be it even at the actual Wallaby level and those feeding into the Wallaby level, that's a really difficult process when the game is a little bit on life support and the revenue stream comes from the success of the top team. That's it. And so those pressures on those people in the chair of those areas are under an enormous amount of pressure to find a solution in a short-term time frame, as opposed to wearing some of the lower level results that you're going to get, but if you're building the base again. And we have to do a lot of work still, and I think we've improved it most definitely, in re-establishing that base and having faith in a coach to stay that may not get the results instantaneously. And, you know, we've had a few, and Joe's had it no longer than anybody else, but I think he's picked up a little bit of legacy from these other guys prior, who were trying very hard, I think, to bring in some new programming and some new systems and stuff. Because none of them are all that dissimilar. They've all got the same background. They would know a lot about what the programs have worked over for different teams over the last decade. And I think some of that's coming through, most definitely. I think I think Joe's selection policy is pretty good. When I say that, I don't understand the machinations of why you use 64 players or something like that, but I think he's putting the right people in the right positions. Where we've had some of the past, we've been putting the wrong people or the right people in the wrong position, or however you want to say that. They're not in the right seat on the bus. And I think he's very much understands where people's capacity to play and when they can maybe move only 1 or 2 positions. He doesn't rotate radically around the place. He's consistent with his, where he puts an individual. He doesn't rip them from, you'll play 10 today and now you're on the wing, and then you're going to go from the wing next week. We'll stick you around at fullback and then we'll take you back and put you in at number 12. I think that's good. And they've done their work on their high performance alignment and getting that sort of control, which I think he's had an influence in some of that as well.
What do you reckon? Do you reckon they can do the Grand Slam?
Well, they'll beat Scotland. If they don't beat Scotland, it'll be embarrassing. I don't know. I watched the Irish again the other day. It's a different animal there.
Scotland are a bloody good team, mate. They got some good players in that lot.
Oh, they've got some very good players. I just don't think they're playing with any confidence. You see that they sort of make some pretty dumb. Smart teams are going to win. Always smart teams. So you've got to have intelligent 9s, 10s who understand it. And, that's why I like the fact that he's stuck with Loliseo, because that kid is now starting to understand how to manage the team around the field. He hasn't done that. He's just tried to be a player under certain instructions where you can see now that he is going, oh, okay, well, plan A was this, but plan A is no good, so I'm going to move it to plan A2. And he'll make that decision to move, the strategy and the format. And I think, they've put the brakes, as I said, they've put the brakes on a kicking game, which we really could never execute very well. And you're seeing the dividends. When you've got these big power running centres like Joseph and Karevi and Len Ikitau and Pasami when he comes back, and they're not just barging people, they've all got some footwork in them, they've got some skill set in their hands with them.
Yeah, true.
Much better to do that, because all I know is the other team can't score if they don't have the ball.
Yeah,
don't give it to them.
It's a bloody good point. All right, Roger. Until next time, thanks for joining the Raw Rugby podcast.
That's right. See ya.
All right, switching gears really quickly. We've spoken probably for too long about the backs. I can already hear people just going, what about the forwards? That's where games of test match rugby are won. And this person knows a lot about rugby, a lot about forward play. He was the former assistant coach under Dave Rennie with the scrum, with the Wallabies, spent years in Scotland and in Britain. It's Petris du Plessis. Petris, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's good to chat a bit of footy with you guys, especially now that we're talking about Scotland and Australia.
Well, we're going to talk about Scotland in a moment, but I want to bring you back to Cardiff 2 years ago, because you with Dave Rennie, the Wallabies were under the pump midway through that second half, and they managed to turn it around. Did today's performance, did the performance on the weekend of Australia getting up under Joe Schmidt, did it bring back some of those feelings about what it's like to play at Millennium and now the Principality?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, looking back at 2 years when it was our last game of the tour, we did pretty well against France and Ireland, just narrowly lost. And then, we needed this Wales game to be a W. And I remember there was a photo of me sort of almost 3/4 through the game where I was just sat with my back against the fence, almost like, the photo just spells out that I'm, fed up and, obviously really deflated. And within the next 20 minutes, we won the game. So, it was tough, that game. We were 17 points behind. I remember I think it's in the top 4 of the Wallabies comebacks ever, and we turned it around. We came away with a win, but look, it's never easy there. I know Wales is going through a significant dry spell, and obviously, hopefully, they'll get things rectified in the next year or so. But yeah, for us, that game was pivotal to finish that tour off, and it was a tough game, but yeah, very memorable.
Hey, Petrus, I'd be interested to know a bit about the current state of what's happening, in particular with the forwards at the Wallaby level. Obviously, you were part of the group a few years back now. What are you seeing as the differences potentially from when you're involved and what you're seeing now with the current group?
Oh, look, I think, the other thing is Jeff Parling was coaching with us the first year with the Wallabies. So I've got a lot of experience working with him and also with the Rebels. So with regards to lineouts and mauls, I know they scored a couple of maul tries on the weekend. So that's always good to see, especially from Australians, because a lot of people might think that Australians, when it comes to set pieces, shouldn't be that strong, but they are. And you got big Will Skelton back in there and a few other guys. So what do they do different? I think obviously their attacking game is allowing the forwards to get a little bit more ball in hand, which we've seen, especially when you look at that last game against England, where they won in the last minute. All the handling that's happened in there. So I wouldn't say a lot has changed, but I would say, the freedom to play, to have a set piece that's strong. Obviously, the coaching staff like Jeff and Chrono is doing a great job there. So it's just good to see the Wallabies winning, especially by a big margin, but also just the freedom to play with some structure, as you can see in the attack. And a couple of tries they scored when Tom Wright scored a couple of tries. There was some good structure there, so it's awesome to see the boys just enjoying it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Speaking on the theme of some of the big guys in the team, in more recent times, well, Angus Bell's been quite phenomenal, I think. Whenever he's been injury-free, he's been one of the key standouts for Wallabies. Taniela Tupou certainly falls into that category. What are you making of what you're seeing from those guys? And we'll throw in Alan Alaalatoa, obviously the skipper on the weekend. The powerhouse up front that we're starting to see from those guys in particular is really providing a strong platform for the rest of for the backs in particular to score some unbelievable tries recently.
Oh, look, if you, I'm talking sort of analytically, if you got a forward pack, you need at least one of the props to carry really well. And I know Taniela wasn't there on the weekend, but Angus Bell, I remember in 2020 when he was, he might have been 20 by, only 20 then. And he always said to me, Petrus, I want to be the best loosehead in the world. I don't just want to be a number. And obviously James Slipper was chosen above him and he was on the bench and he kept saying, I want to be the best. I should be playing more, etc. So I said, look, you're still young. It's going to happen. And actually, I think in the last couple of weeks, now his name is thrown around as one of the best looseheads in the world. So he's definitely achieved that. So fair play to him. He's dreamed big and he's playing even bigger. So to see him carry the ball the way he does, he plays 60, 70 minutes and still carries the same in the 50, 60th minute, is phenomenal. I think his scrummaging is only going to get better over time if that injuries stay away. So there you've got one. And then, you got Bobby Valentini. He's consistent. He played 50 caps on the weekend. He's always carrying. He's always there. He plays long minutes. He's phenomenal. Then you bring in Will Skelton, who's a big body. He can carry, but he just obviously dominates. And then you look at Frosty, for a lock who's scoring 40-meter tries is phenomenal. He's unbelievably quick. So when you break it down, and this is always what I was looking at when I was helping choosing the team, is you need one prop that's set piece dominant. You would need one prop that's really good in the loose. Same with the lock. So there you've got a good lock combination. And that doesn't say that the locks who didn't play on the weekend is not good enough. And then you get guys like Fraser McWright, who's unbelievably skillful and everywhere on the pitch with big Bobby V at the back. So then you got guys on the bench coming off who's doing just as good of a job. And Alan is just a solid tight head. So to answer your question, put all that together, you got a good balance now in your forward pack, and it works.
Hey, Petrus, there's been a fair bit of scrutiny, a bit of heat on Taniela Tupou for quite a while now, probably the best part of 14 months, fitness issues off the back of injuries, and even against England. I think he carried a knee injury into the game, but struggled at the set piece, got a couple of penalties conceded there, but also probably just didn't have the same impetus that we're used to seeing with ball in hand. What do you know of Taniela that makes him so effective when he's on? And also, how important do you think he is to Australian rugby and the Wallabies over the next few years? Because he's off contract at the end of next year. There's talk about, is it best to let him go and just pick him for the Wallabies? Would you go, no, we need to spend the $1 million on Taniela to keep him in the game here on Australian shores?
Yeah, look, I've known Taniela since 2020 and worked closely with him, especially through all his injuries. I was mainly sort of his one-on-one year on the Gold Coast. Taniela is one of the most bizarre, genetically composed human beings you've ever seen. He needs to work really hard on his fitness and diet, as all props probably has to do. But he's so powerful. He's such a explosive athlete that injuries will come his way, and that's one of the things. I mean, there's only so much a tendon or a muscle can take with all that nerves firing in his body. But coming back to it, back then when in 2020 2020 to 2023, we loved what he brought off the bench. So a lot of the time he sat on the bench because he can come on, with 35 minutes to go and absolutely be destructive, like we've seen when we beat South Africa a couple of times, what he can do. He's grown as a human in the way that he's a lot more mature, and he got a lot of starts now. So for me, he's now at that sort of period in his life where give him more starts and back him more, and he's just going to keep producing it. So yeah, I can't say what he should be doing and whether it's money or this, that, and the other, but Australia should keep hold of him for, at least till after the World Cup, and then reassess. But because he can probably easily start now. He's a lot fitter. He's doing a lot better than what he did when he first came into the Wallabies camp when he was a youngster. So look, he's always going to pick up injuries along the way because of genetically what the forces he produce. But he's come back from Achilles and he looked pretty good. I know sometimes, look, tight end is probably one of the toughest positions on the pitch. You sometimes have an unbelievable game and you carry, 12 times and you scrum and you dominate everything. And then sometimes you just don't have your best game. So I don't think anyone should take a prop, for example, and base it off a couple of games. Look at the guy's potential. Look at what he can do. And yeah, you got to stick with him, I believe.
Yeah. I tend to agree, and I think that 2027 piece in particular about having him at the World Cup, I think that's paramount for Wallabies' potential success. Just shifting gears slightly, let's talk a bit about Scotland. Obviously, you spent a lot of time yourself in Glasgow, coached there after finishing playing, obviously involved with the Scottish national team. How do you think they're tracking? And obviously, give us a bit of an idea of how you experience the Scottish culture. And if you have any insight to where they're currently at. Obviously, you coached under Gregor. Gregor's been involved with Scotland as a head coach for a long time now. And they're always a very interesting beat, Scotland. Like, they're always a team you fear. And I just wonder if that's going to be the case this weekend or if you see the Wallabies getting on top.
Yeah, it's a tough one, really. I was thinking today, what would I say, which direction it would go? I mean, it's Murrayfield. It's packed with passionate fans. Scottish people are very passionate about their rugby. So, and you look at the Scottish team now, they just getting better and better. Some of those players back in, the early 2020s who might have had 15 caps now probably sitting on like 50 caps. So everybody is growing. I think they play a very structured game. And for me, the Wallabies will also probably go in with quite a bit of structure. It'll be a close one. That's what I would say. The Scottish camp is physical. They work hard, same as any other international team, but they pride themselves on set piece. So I think the Wallabies would have to get that set piece part right, win their lineouts. If they can maul, if the Wallabies can maul well against them, that'll go in their favour. And the scrum, like I say, I've worked with Peter de Villiers, I've worked with Chrono, so you're going to see two immovable objects. So if there's any penalties, it'll probably be penalties for collapsing or standing up or this, that, and the other. Whereas I'm not seeing any of the sides being completely dominant. I think it's going to be a good set piece game.
And is there an area you think Scotland will look to exploit the Wallabies? Is there something you've seen in how the Wallabies are playing at the moment, especially under Joe Schmidt, and what Gregor potentially could bring out?
Surely the scrum, Parksy.
Well, yeah, you'd think so.
With Finn Russell, if Finn Russell's playing, you just don't know. Anything can happen. So there's probably that little bit of magic. I know Noah Lolesio would probably be very structured and play the plays that they called, where Finn could pull anything out the bag. And I must say, both of those 10s are pretty well at putting little dinks over and kicking to corners and playing miss passes or inside balls or show and go. So what I liked about the Wallabies against Wales, especially, and against England, is just the amount of clever lines they were running and playing the ball out the back. So a couple of tries against Wales where they could have a guy running hard. He might get it. He might not play out the back, and you get the back line sweeping left and right. So even that last play against England, the amount of handling, if you play that really slowly, you see a lot of handling. I think it was Fraser McRae to give it back to the centres, and then obviously Lenny Ikitau, he's been throwing those backdoor passes for the last 4 years. People's only appreciating it now when it mattered, but that's another guy who should have gone perhaps to the World Cup. But so when you put all those skillful players against each other, anything can happen. I cannot tell you exactly if there's a specific game plan for each, but if they can play territory and then when they strike, be effective, then the team who's doing that best is going to win.
Yeah. I think it's going to be. I'll just say, I just think it's going to be a hell of a game. I think both sides. From what I'm seeing, certainly with Scotland, they put on 59 on the weekend. They were ultra competitive for a long time against South Africa. I think we all recognise that at the end of that game, Scotland just couldn't handle the barrage of physical abuse that they copped for 70 odd minutes, and then South Africa got on top in the end. But what we're seeing, the skill level of both sides is through the roof. If it's a dry day, which we're very hopeful it will be, it could be one of the all-time great attacking games of rugby, obviously with some great defence in there. It's going to be whoever I think defends the best, because I think both sides are playing, from my opinion, with great confidence.
Yeah.
Hey, Petrus, gun to the head, who's winning? What's the score?
This is a tough one because I've got, I don't want to be, it's a personal one really, because I got so many mates in both camps. I think it'll be close. What I would say is it'll be 2 points either way. And I know we've gone down there and won by 1 point in the past, and they still remember that, and they will remember. So I'm going to go, and don't shoot the messenger. I'm just going to say, because where it is, it's in Murrayfield. I'm going to say Scotland by 2.
Yeah. I think that's, and to be like, if we're being honest about the whole thing, I know that some people think, well, it's only Scotland. Just to educate some people that don't actually understand how much you mentioned earlier on, the passion of the people. I don't think Scotland has ever sold out a game against Portugal ever. It was sold out on the weekend. They are completely behind the national team in rugby right now, and they're playing against the Wallabies. The Wallabies are obviously flying high on the back of 2 wins. Scotland will have so much belief about the fact that they can really win this game, and the fact that two sides, I think, are in good touch. Just don't be, don't be surprised if the Scots put on a really, really solid performance and pull it out of the bag.
And so you can't call the underdogs here. You don't know which one's the underdogs because they just both come off 2 big wins. South Africa is a force to be reckoned with, as we've seen now. So when Scotland lost to them, it's not like they've lost to other teams like imagine Portugal or other lower grade teams beat them. But look, I think it's always a good spectacle there. I've always enjoyed being there, and a lot of those Scottish players is only gone better and better. And to be fair, you look at Scotland rugby now. When I was with Glasgow at with Dave Rennie, we got to the what is called now the URC final against Leinster and lost 20 points to 17. And now just this season gone, Glasgow's won it. So for a small country, they are doing very good, and that's only going to feed their national team.
Hey, Petrus, awesome to get your insights into both here in Australia but also in Scotland. I thought you were going to sit on the fence before about which way it was going to go. It would have had to have been a pretty heavy fence, sturdy enough to support you. But, hey, awesome to talk. Good to see your face and look forward to talking again in the not-so-distant future.
100%. Thank you very much, and all the best to the Wallabies. That's all I can say. Because I, to be fair, I want them to win. So let's go.
Let's go.
Okay.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Hey, awesome to have a couple of those gentlemen, fine gentlemen indeed, Roger Gould, Petris du Plessis joining the Raw Rugby podcast. And awesome it kind of brings, it makes you very excited about the weekend to come. Dan, what do you think? How's this game going to play out? And if you're an Australian supporting, watching on, how do the Wallabies go about winning?
Well, I think there's got to be an element of being patient. Scotland are quite notorious, in particular in recent times, for starting the game very well, starting the game really, really fast, which if you look 2 weeks ago, that's exactly what England did. There's just got to be an element of patience, stick at it. And I think what we saw on the weekend, as the game went on, some of the real big bodies from the Wallabies really took over. We mentioned Valentini, obviously Skelton while he was on the field was instrumental, some of those bigger forwards. And it was the ability to be able to punch through. Again, I mentioned his name earlier on, but some of Kellaway's runs, through the middle and through the real tough stuff just to get momentum, I thought was really crucial. And I think the Wallabies are going to need that again this weekend. So I think there's got to be an element of patience, really build into the game, and then try and come over the top. But in saying that, Scotland, in many ways, quite a similar sort of looking team. They've got some real dangers on the wing. There's a massive winger called Doran van der Merwe.
How good is he? Yeah.
And they'll more than likely have Darcy Graham, who is an absolute try-scoring freak on the right side, very small, low to the ground, a bit like Kurtley Aransa in many ways for South Africa. So, they'll be key to if they can find space, could be difficult. Sione Tuipulotu, who is a Scottish captain currently, is a former Melbourne Rebel player who his game, since he moved to Scotland, has just gone through the roof. I think he's the current Lions favourite to be the inside centre for next year's tour. So Finn Russell hasn't even been really talked about, but we know how good he is. And again, their pack is very set-piece driven. So there's a lot of dangers there. But I think that power game, if the Wallabies can get on top, then I can see them slightly winning. But I think back to Petrus's point, don't be surprised if it's even a draw or it's a 1 or 2 point game either way. But either way, I think it's worth getting up and watching because I reckon it will be a really high-quality game.
Yeah, in the early hours of Monday morning Australian Eastern Time. I agree. I think it's going to be a couple of points in this one. I think the fact that Scotland managed to stick with South Africa for so long shows that they're a formidable side, that they've got a pack that can take it to most sides. And the defence of the Wallabies isn't going to be what South Africa has proved and shown over the last couple of years either. So Finn Russell will be licking his lips rather. I think there'll be some points in this game. If it's nice conditions, it'll be a game to watch. The Wallabies are going to have to make a couple of changes. No Samu Karevi, well, it looks like it anyway. A red card, upgraded red card. Controversial decision really in the end by James Dolman to show him the upgraded red, but it means that they're going to have to get that overturned for him to come into the reckoning. It probably means that Joseph Akusu-Suwali returns to the midfield. It perhaps frees up a spot on the bench for maybe a Harry Potter to come in. The other one that I think is going to be interesting, there's a couple of guys that were rested or given a week to be able to get over little niggles like Jeremy Williams, like Tanya Latupo. And Harry Wilson, of course, was out with concussion. Would you bring them all back straight away? Would you bring one or two of them? Did you like what Will Skelton showed, and therefore maybe you have Jeremy Williams at 6 and perhaps even Harry Wilson comes off the bench despite the fact that he was captain previously? What would you do there with that forward pack?
I think there's some good headaches to have, that's for sure. We're in a very fortunate position. My thought would be that Valentini would go back to 6 and Harry Wilson comes back in at 8. He'll be the skipper, I would have thought. The prop position depends on how Teniel is doing, but either way, it'll either be himself or Allen there. I would imagine Jeremy Williams will probably go to the bench considering Skelton, how good he was and his sheer size. And I think in the backs, I think it's a pretty easy decision. We saw how influential Joseph Akusu-Suwali was in that first game. So I'd say he will go straight back into the 12 slot, and I don't see too much being different. Potentially Jake Gordon might come back in at 9. And I think, in regards to that, I think the whole idea of this tour is to really build competition within the group. And that's clear to see. The guys who got given an opportunity against Wales, you'd have to say they took it. But certainly the guys that started against England, I think, will be preferred to getting this opportunity against Scotland. On what is it, late Sunday night, early Monday morning. So, but either way, I think there's going to be, it's a good problem to have. I think if you go back even 4 months, these sort of headaches weren't there. Do you know what I mean? As a spectator and as a fan, you weren't thinking, oh gosh, if someone was out, it was a real, what are we going to do? But now I think it's all about confidence, and the confidence you can see is pretty high. And I think there's a belief that whoever fills the jersey is going to do it proud.
Yeah, I completely agree. It looks like a couple of guys might be joining from the Oz A side to fill out that Wallabies team. We know that a couple of them won't be there at the end of the tour, like Skelton and Karevi for the Ireland match. So you might see a Hamish Stewart or a Tom Hooper link back. Obviously, they spent time with them in the Rugby Championship. Last one before we go. New Zealand, so close. Epic test match. Are the All Blacks completely on track under Scott Robinson? Have they finished? I know that they've got Italy this weekend, but they should be way too good for them. If you're an All Blacks fan, are you confident in the direction that they're going?
Oh, 100%. I think that's without doubt. You know, going to the Stade de France, we saw how busy the crowd were, how parochial they were. New Zealand got themselves in a position to win that game. But France on home soil, very, very tough place to go and win. And, you know, again, that was a classic game. Like, it really was. It could have gone either way. Obviously, in the end, it went the way of Le Bleu. And you could see how excited they were at the end of the game. It meant so much to France to win that game. I think it's been a hugely successful period for New Zealand rugby. I reckon Razor Robinson at times might have felt, you know, the old nails getting a bit short there and a bit concerned. But clearly he had belief in the group that he's brought through. And if you look at that side, there's just so much quality. Like, there was an effort at the end of the game from Adi Sevilla when the ball was kicked downfield. It was the French winger, but Baril, like, incredibly fast guy. And Sevilla got back there to save what was a certain try, and that would have extended the scoreline out. But, you know, just even that, I think it says a lot, not just about him, but about where the All Blacks are at and the passion that the guy they're playing for. Like, we've talked about him before, Robinson, his incredible success he's had at whatever level coaching. And you can already see he's going to have the same with the All Blacks. And I think it's good. It's good to see the All Blacks firing. And, yeah, they'll certainly get stronger over the next course of games and leading into next year.
Well, it sets up next year's series against France spectacularly. I agree. Adi Sevilla, I think he started the international campaign a bit slow, perhaps off the back of a stint in Japan, but wow, he's finished really strongly indeed. An awesome test. That clash against Italy to look forward to as well. Ireland are going to be able to perhaps ease up a little bit. I think they've got Fiji this weekend as well, but they'll be relieved. Wow, look, I don't think they'll fear. I don't think they'll go in there with the same bit of nervousness that they would have had against Argentina. They'll know that a physical test is coming, but there'll be a fair bit of relief around Andy Farrell's camp off the back of responding with victory there. I can't wait to see what pans out against Scotland. I think discipline is going to be the most important thing. If they can get less than 10 penalties, not give Scotland too many sniffs, I think they'll be too good, but that's a big if. Dan, we've gone through a lot today, and it's been a long, long one as well, but awesome to have you on the pod today, and can't wait to do it again in 7 days' time.
Yeah, that's certainly the case. I'm looking forward to this weekend. We talk about it every week, but this weekend is going to be class. I think this is, you know, if they can get this one against Scotland, it builds so nicely going into next week against Ireland. But as I think I said last week, don't just consider this a certainty, because that certainly won't be the case. But enjoy your rugby over the weekend, and we'll see you next week.
That's the message. Don't write off the Scots. All right. Until then, I'm Christy Doran. Thanks for joining us on the Raw Rugby Podcast.